Hey guys, today I'll show you a neo-Western drama TV series named Yellowstone, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama takes place in the northern part of the United States, in Montana, where the people's primary livelihood is agriculture and livestock. Among them, the most famous rancher is an old man named Dutton, who has 3 sons and 1 daughter. Thanks to the family's years of dedicated management, his ranch has expanded to over 4 million acres, nearly encroaching on the nearby Yellowstone Park and the Indian Reservation. However, such a vast piece of land is bound to stir jealousy among others. A lethal car accident sparked a plot to plunder the Dutton family's property. To develop Montana's population and economy, the local government proposed that the Dutton family relinquish 180,000 acres for development. After all, for the Dutton family, this land is merely a drop in the bucket. But this was bluntly rejected by Jamie, the second son of Dutton, who is a lawyer. He mentioned the constitutional provision that personal land and property cannot be infringed upon, and that no rancher has ever willingly given up their land to others. Besides the government, 2 other individuals also worry Dutton. They are the newly appointed Indian tribal chief, and Dan, a real estate developer from Paradise Valley. The tribal chief is ambitious, running a wealthy casino and constantly thinking about reclaiming the Indian land seized by Americans years ago, including Dutton's ranch. On the other hand, Dan aims to build residential areas, power stations, and dams in Montana, which would inevitably impact the ranch's ecological environment. Conflicts soon erupted. Someone deliberately dismantled the iron fence between the Dutton Ranch and the Indian Reservation, causing the cattle to wander into the reservation. According to the tribal rules, any cattle that enter their territory become their property. Dutton's eldest son, Lee, almost clashed with the Indians, but Dutton intervened at the crucial moment. He intended to ask a familiar Indian elder to bring back the cattle. However, the elder stated that the new tribal chief was strict and he was helpless. Dutton glanced at a young man among the cattle. That was his youngest and most beloved son, Case. He knew among his 4 children, the eldest son, Lee, kind-hearted and passionate, lacks foresight and can't inherit the ranch. The second son, Jamie, is ambitious but lacks ability, and is somewhat weak in critical moments. His daughter, Beth, is a powerhouse in the business world, but unwilling to bother with cattle or horses. Only Case, not only is he a top-notch horse trainer, but he is also strong-willed and decisive. Unfortunately, he fell in love with an Indian girl, Monica, and has left the Dutton family to live on the Indian Reservation for several years. Dutton could only leave the cattle temporarily with the Indians. He then turned to Jamie, asking him to prepare to sue the Indians. Just as he finished speaking, he ran into the Chief Justice, who was very fond of Jamie and wanted to recommend him for a political career, but this was immediately rejected by Dutton. Afterwards, Dutton rushed to meet Case overnight. He reminded Case not to take a stand at critical moments and said he might as well visit his grandson. However, his son rejected both suggestions. Case was actually quite torn. On one hand, there was his lover. On the other, his family. Yet that very night, Monica persuaded him to take their child to visit his father. As a mother herself, she didn't want to face the heartache of having a child who wouldn't come home when she was old. So, Case took his son back to Dutton's ranch. On the drive, he was initially quite anxious. However, upon arrival, his siblings greeted them warmly. Case went horseback riding and fishing with his son and brothers, as if returning to his childhood, where everything seemed so joyful. However, when they returned home from Dutton's ranch that night, Case overheard Monica's 2 brothers discussing splitting and slaughtering the cattle. One of them, named Robert, even provocatively told Case that he had killed 2 people, hinting that Case shouldn't mess with him. Case was speechless. They didn't know Case had served in the Navy and had received a medal. The battlefield was certainly far more terrifying than mere murder. Subsequently, the chief came to visit Case. He wanted to use the cattle herd as a bargaining chip to do business with the Dutton family. Since he didn't understand Dutton's character, he came to inquire from Case. Case told him that his father was generally reasonable, but if anyone crossed his line, he would turn his back on them instantly. No one could steal a cow or a piece of land from Dutton. Thus, the next day, the chief's negotiations with Dutton broke down. Meanwhile, Monica's grandfather came to find Case, hoping that Case would take Monica away from the Indian Reserve. He knew the Indian Reserve was not Case's true home. As he did not want Case to be caught in the middle of this dispute, he advised him to protect his family at critical moments. However, before Case could make a decision, Dutton and Lee went to rustle the cattle. In addition, he secretly sent a team up the mountain to blow up the dam, trying to thwart Dan's project and cover his cattle rustling. But no one expected a gunfight to break out during the cattle rustling. The Indians tried to halt the Duttons' operation, and Robert happened to shoot Lee. Upon seeing this, Case rushed over to save his brother, knocking Robert off his horse. But when Robert tried to get up and fight back, Case shot him dead. The cattle rustling operation was forcefully terminated. The next morning, Case returned to the ranch carrying Lee's body and broke the news to their father, Dutton. Dutton held his eldest son, heartbroken. Meanwhile, Monica, who stayed at home, was clueless about what had happened. She opened the door only to see Case's horse and thought her husband had had an accident, which brought tears to her eyes. But then she looked up to see the Dutton family's helicopter, with Case sitting inside, unscathed. She rushed up to greet him, and the couple embraced passionately, but without a kiss. When they got home, Monica pressed Case about her brother's death. However, Case couldn't tell his wife the truth because he was a Dutton. He had the Dutton family's brand on his chest and their blood running through his veins. At Lee's funeral, Dutton kept a stoic face, as tough as ever. However, once he was alone in the horse barn, he transformed into the pitiful old father sending off his dead son. But no matter how much he regretted it, his lost son wouldn't come back, and life had to go on. After gathering his emotions, Dutton walked out of the barn. He found Jamie and Beth and hugged them tightly. It was time for the Dutton family to unite. At this point in Montana, everyone outside their family would become a target for revenge. Ever since the cattle dispute, Case had been avoiding Monica's questions. One day, while working on the farm, his tractor was overturned by a stump. He furiously blew up the stump, startling Monica, who was having a bath. She jumped out, wrapped in a towel, and scolded her husband. However, their son, Tate, was thrilled because he found some dinosaur fossils in the explosion pit. Meanwhile, Jamie was called by the governor. The police had examined Lee's body. Lee was hit in the spine, which meant he was likely paralyzed on the spot and couldn't have shot Robert. Moreover, there were 6 bullet holes in Robert's body, 5 of which were arranged in a perfect circle, a shooting precision that Lee, growing up on a ranch, couldn't have achieved. There must have been a third person who had killed Robert. The governor speculated that the root cause of the cattle incident might be the Duttons' racial discrimination against the Indians. Since the incident had caused a national sensation, once the autopsy report was uploaded to the National File Network, all media would try to access it. If racial discrimination was exposed, Montana would be shamed, and the governor might even be implicated and step down. To prevent the situation from worsening, she temporarily withheld the autopsy report and gave the lawyer Jamie 7 days to get an explanation from his father. Jamie wanted to discuss strategies with his sister Beth, but was mocked before he could explain his intentions. Beth, who was always rebellious, looked down on the somewhat weak Jamie and even mocked him for being gay, which ended in everyone leaving unhappily. Jamie could only tell Dutton everything. He found out among the 2 eyewitness officers, one of them was a friend of the Duttons, and the other one was a Christian whom he had never heard of. Dutton asked Jamie to investigate the Christian officer's regular church. Despite this, Dutton felt that dealing with the 2 officer witnesses wouldn't be a problem. However, Jamie insisted they must deal with the autopsy report and even Lee's body, because anyone who saw these pieces of evidence would find out there was another person involved in killing Robert. Dutton hurriedly stopped Jamie from speaking further. The fact was that he had to choose between the living and the dead. Later, Jamie found out that the coroner who performed the autopsy on Robert had given the report to the Indian tribal police, which further escalated the situation. He wanted to use the coroner's drug addiction to threaten him, but Dutton stopped him. He didn't think a renowned ranching family should negotiate with a drug dealer, so he sent his most capable hitman, Rip, to do the job. After knocking out the coroner in his office, Rip tampered with the microwave to create the illusion of a self-inflicted fire before escaping the scene. Dutton began to take action. He first went to see the father of the officer witness, who was anxiously watching his other son competing in a bullfight. As Dutton looked over the bullfighting arena, he remarked that daughters were easier to raise, while sons gave too much worry and might even get themselves killed. The officer's father immediately understood his intentions and promised not to let his son gossip about Robert's death. Next, Dutton visited the church where the Christian officer often attended. The priest there owed a large favor to the Dutton family. So, the priest used his sermon that day to speak about unity, emphasizing that unity can only be achieved if they do not casually slander their neighbors. The Christian officer found the sermon strange, but he trusted the priest and decided to keep quiet about what he saw regarding Case. Unable to face his wife, Case began considering re-enlisting in the military. He called his former Navy captain and learned that they were at war. He requested to rejoin and received approval. However, Monica was puzzled by Case's decision. She didn't know what she had done wrong to drive away her husband, who once swore to her that he would never leave. Case said it was because he loved her that he had to leave. While they were discussing this, a small house by the roadside suddenly exploded. After making sure Monica was safe, Case told her to call the police immediately. The homeowner had been critically injured in the explosion, and his entire family had been killed. The ambulance was 45 minutes away. Hearing this, the homeowner asked Case to end his suffering as he couldn't endure the pain of the burns for that long. With Monica's consent, Case shot the homeowner to send him to sweet heaven. When the tribal chief and the Indian police sheriff arrived, they found only the homeowner's body. The chief didn't want rumors of the explosion to spread, so he asked the sheriff to swap gun cases with Case. The sheriff comforted Case, stating that if anyone asked, the person who ended the homeowner's suffering was him, and Case was just a witness. In the quiet of the night, a group of people brought Lee's coffin to the crematorium. Dutton, accompanied by Jamie, watched silently as Lee's body was reduced to ashes, powerless to do anything. Dutton believed that if Lee's body wasn't cremated, someone curious might dig it up someday, and if the truth was discovered, Case couldn't be protected. Among his children, Case was the one who most needed protection. At dawn, Dutton buried Lee's ashes next to his wife's grave. Case was also struggling. On his drive home, he encountered a lone wolf, which reminded him of his childhood. While he was staring at the lone wolf in a daze, a truck approached from the opposite direction. Case honked his horn urgently, but the wolf, as if it hadn't heard, didn't move and was hit and killed by the truck. Upon returning home, Case found Monica deeply upset about his decision to re-enlist. Monica had a vague intuition that everything was connected to the events of the night of the cattle raid, but she preferred not to uncover the truth. All she wanted was for Case to stay. However, Case said that if he stayed, things would only get worse. The scene shifts to Beth, uncovering the truth why she didn't ride horses. She had been fearful of them since childhood. For a member of the famous ranching family, this was practically a joke. As a result, her mother often took her and Case out for horse rides. During one such ride, Beth lost control of her horse and charged towards her mother. The horse got spooked, fell to the ground, and caused severe internal bleeding to her mother. Case wanted to get help, but their mother stopped him. She said that the mistake Beth made should be rectified by her, and asked Beth to go back to the ranch and find their father. Beth was terrified and agreed while sobbing. However, on the way, she got lost, fell off her horse, and injured her arm. When Dutton saw his wife's horse and Case's horse return riderless, he knew something was wrong. He galloped across the ranch with his men, finally finding Beth on foot. However, the young girl was so scared that she had completely forgotten where her mother was injured. Dutton had no choice but to console his daughter and continue searching blindly. By the time they found the location, it was late in the night. Case was there, holding a knife, guarding his mother's body, and nearly being eaten by a nearby wolf. After this incident, Beth's personality drastically changed, and she became even more afraid of horses. Beth thought that the whole family would remember this tragic day, especially her, Case, and their father. However, on the anniversary of her mother's death, Dutton brought the governor home, and they became intimate. In response, Beth did something unthinkable. She ran naked to the horse trough outside her father's door, disregarding everyone's gaze. Jamie ran to dissuade her, but was ridiculed for not remembering their mother's Memorial Day. Beth waited until the governor left. The governor wanted to greet Beth with a polite smile, but Beth's expression was too fierce, forcing the governor to leave awkwardly. Finally, the hitman Rip also ran over to persuade Beth. They had grown up together and were childhood sweethearts. However, after Beth's drastic personality change, she looked down upon Rip. She rejected Rip and declared that no one would have a good day. On the other hand, Case was actively practicing shooting, preparing to re-enlist. On his way home after practice, he encountered a suspicious truck. He suspected that someone was causing trouble on the Indian reservation and went to check with his gun. He discovered a kidnapped Indian girl in the truck. The kidnapper tried to shoot Case but was killed instead. The truck driver noticed something was wrong and tried to flee. Case hid his son in a cave and then chased after the truck. Eventually, the truck fell into a large pit. As the driver tried to escape, he was tripped by Case's lasso, fell onto a rock, and died. Case sighed looking at the body and then went back to the truck to save the girl. He wanted to call the police, but the girl was afraid of being questioned and refused. She said that the bad guys had already been punished. Case had to clean up the scene and leave. Unexpectedly, there was a rattlesnake in the cave where his son was hiding. When he returned, the snake had already been killed by his son. After Case sent the Indian girl home, her father learned about the incident and was indignant. However, the two white criminals were already dead, and they had no evidence. They could even be held responsible by the whites. He could only beg Case to help him deal with the bodies. Case promised to come and help him after sending his son home. Due to the urgency of the situation, he didn't even have time to explain to Monica. Meanwhile, upon learning that the Attorney General of Montana was about to leave his position, Jamie started considering the idea of running for the office. After all, having a man in the office could make things easier. He even hoped for financial support from his father. However, Dutton didn't agree. He was still concerned about the herd of cattle that had been occupied by the tribal chief. He patiently waited for the tribal chief to leave the Indian reservation and immediately had him arrested and sent him to jail. Still, the tribal chief was fearless. He had carefully estimated the Dutton family's wealth, which was as high as $14 billion. However, none of Dutton's children had the ability to pay the high inheritance tax, but he could buy the land as soon as Dutton died and restore the entire valley to his rule. This made Dutton start considering Jamie's suggestion. It was time for someone in the family to get into politics. However, Dutton's choice wasn't Jamie, but the smart and strong Beth. Before Dutton made the request, Beth asked him why he chose to bring the governor home today. Dutton paused and said it was because today was the day he most wanted to forget. Thus, the father and daughter quickly reconciled. As night fell, Case and the old man dug a big pit and cremated the two kidnappers. He didn't understand why they had to dig a hole for cremation. The old man told him that the Indians believed that when the body was cremated, the soul would also be imprisoned. He wanted the two kidnappers to be trapped in the earth and never reincarnate. At the same time, Jamie was going through the greatest sadness of his life. Dutton had invited many political figures, but the protagonist was Beth. Jamie broke down and accused Beth of being a cancer cell, not only occupying his credit but also destroying the huge family. However, Beth said that everything she did was for their father, while Jamie's hard work was just for his own planning, so their father did not trust him. Jamie was forced to use their mother's death to satirize Beth, resulting in a beating. He could not bear it and fought back, but was ridiculed for not being like a man. At night, Dutton came to warn Jamie not to hit Beth again, and also agreed to support him in running for Attorney General. Later, when a worker, Jimmy, was cleaning up, he saw Dutton sitting in the horse stable with a hopeless face, murmuring that the family had fallen apart. So Dutton slept in the horse stable that night until he was awakened by a car horn the next day. On the other side, in order to get out of jail, the imprisoned tribal chief finally compromised and returned the cattle to the Dutton family. Meanwhile, there was trouble at Case's home. Robert's wife, pressured by life, ended her own life, leaving 3 children with no one to look after them. What's worse, a group of workers were preparing to start construction on the burial ground made for the 2 kidnappers, and trouble was coming. After discovering the bodies of the kidnappers, the foreman on the construction site quickly called the police. The tribal chief arrived with the sheriff and cordoned off the area. Seeing this, the foreman regretted his actions. Fearing it would delay the project, he insisted the bones must be centuries old. In response, the tribal chief cracked open a bone, revealing fresh marrow inside, much to the foreman's disgust. Meanwhile, Dutton was beginning his new day, overseeing his cattle from a helicopter. Rip and Jimmy were on the ground, herding cattle as instructed. Unfortunately, Jimmy fell off his horse and lost his cowboy hat midway. For the sake of his cowboy pride, he separated from the group to find his hat, only to stumble upon a lone calf. When the cattle had finished grazing and returned to the herd, Dutton was busy taming horses. Watching him energetically at work, 2 older workers couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. One of them, whose son was Dutton's doctor, knew that Dutton had colon cancer. Just last week, he had secretly undergone surgery to remove part of his colon. Regardless of his physical condition or age, Dutton was due for retirement, but none of his children were capable of taking his place, and with enemies looming, he had to keep his health condition a secret. Following the suicide of his sister-in-law, Case and Monica found themselves financially incapable of raising Robert's 3 children. Consequently, Monica informed the children's grandparents of what had happened. Monica knew well that her sister-in-law's parents had disowned her years ago for marrying the Indian man Robert. After the death of Robert, and without any income, her suicide was a sacrificial act of motherly love. Only through this could the children return to their grandparents and live a life free from worry. Unwilling to let her son Tate witness the departure of his cousins, Monica sent him to his grandfather's ranch with Case, fearful that the child might ask questions she couldn't answer. Upon hearing he was going to the ranch, Tate was overjoyed. After explaining their situation to his father, Dutton took Tate to play by the river. The two planned to build a fire and roast fish, with Dutton entrusting the task of gathering firewood to Tate. However, in his eagerness to pick up a larger branch, Tate fell into the river. Realizing Tate was missing, Dutton knew something was wrong. Disregarding his own wounds, he quickly stripped and jumped into the water. Thankfully, Tate was rescued. Seeing his grandson shivering from the cold, Dutton held him close. They built a fire to warm up. When Dutton was checking his wounds, Tate noticed that. With no other choice, Dutton lied and told his grandson that he had sustained the injuries in a fight with a monster. Meanwhile, Jimmy had returned to the ranch, cradling a calf in his arms, earning praise from the old workers. They told him he was like a true cowboy, boosting his confidence exponentially. However, this act of valor stirred jealousy in a meathead, one of the workers. In a fit of envy, he gave Jimmy a good beating. Jimmy refused to back down. He was determined to stand up to the meathead, regardless of whether he could win the fight or not. When Rip discovered that Jimmy was being bullied, he stepped in, knocking the meathead to the ground and subsequently firing him. In front of everyone, Rip pulled Jimmy forward, showing off the Dutton family brand on his chest. Anyone with the brand was a member of the Dutton clan, and no one could bully a Dutton on this ranch. At this time, Dutton returned with Tate, whose face was injured and needed stitches. The incident of falling into the river couldn't be hidden from Case. On the way back, Dutton told his grandson not to defend himself when Case lashed out, as he bore a large part of the responsibility for the incident. When Case arrived, he simply asked about what had happened, then left with Tate in his arms. Later, Rip reported to Dutton that he had fired the meathead worker. Dutton approved of Rip's actions but was concerned about the meathead's knowledge of many Dutton family secrets due to his years of service. He needed to be handled. Rip understood and agreed to take the meathead to the train station. With the meathead's position vacant, Dutton hoped to find a branded replacement and asked Rip to look for someone in prison. Anyone who looked promising would do. Dutton's father had come from prison, and he didn't discriminate against these people. That night, the meathead was driven away. Upon hearing that he would be taken to the train station, he was quite relieved, only to discover his final destination was a cliff, the end point of his life. Back at home, Dutton recalled the day's events, filled with guilt. He even threw money into the stove in frustration. What was the use of all this money? At his age, he had failed to groom a successor and had almost caused his grandson's death. As Tate was getting stitches, Monica showed up, ready to scold, but a nurse nearby reassured her that it's okay for children to have bumps and bruises. They're fragile for a reason. This left Monica unable to blame her husband. On their way home, an Indian police car caught up with Case. They suspected him of burying the two bodies and arrested him. All Monica could do was hold Tate tightly, shielding him from seeing his father in handcuffs. Elsewhere, Beth was making her move. She lured the real estate developer Dan to a cowboy bar. Dan thought he could gain some advantage from Dutton's daughter and willingly took the bait. What he didn't expect was Beth's complete change of demeanor upon entering the bar. She provoked him and the cowboys, resulting in him getting punched several times. Realizing he had been tricked, Dan left the bar in anger. Rip found Beth and didn't understand her actions. Beth explained that she did it intentionally because anger can make people lose their rationality and stop thinking. The battle was about to begin, and she was ready. Amid the bar's atmosphere, their conversation lightened, and they even danced their hormones away. Maybe that moment triggered their both past stories. Recently, Dutton was considering buying a racehorse. As soon as he arrived at the stables, the owner introduced him to the most expensive one, priced at $5 million. Jamie, upon hearing this price, rolled his eyes. But indeed, there was a significant difference between $200,000 and $1 million. As Dutton was deliberating, he turned his head to see Monica leading a downtrodden Tate to find him. Afterward, Dutton started getting busy trying to rescue Case, who was taken by the police. However, he and Jamie had asked all the courts and found that they hadn't signed any arrest warrant for Case. This meant that nobody had discovered Case's murder of Robert. The Indian police had only detained Case privately. Things became much simpler all of a sudden. Dutton sent Jamie to take a helicopter and urgently bring Case back. He then asked Monica about the situation, but she also didn't know why Case was arrested. Dutton took the opportunity to persuade Monica to consider her little family and Tate's future. He suggested they move to the ranch. After all, the Indian reservation was too poor and they were still struggling to make ends meet. Since there were other options, why not give it a try? Seeing Tate enjoying himself by the side, Monica started to seriously consider moving away from the Indian reservation. At this time, Case was sitting in the Indian Police Department, being interrogated by the tribal chief and sheriff. The police had found the sheriff's bullet in the charred body. Since the sheriff and Case had swapped ammunition boxes, they were able to find Case so quickly. Case then explained in detail the process of saving the girl, stating that all he did was in self-defense. He also felt he had no say in the matter of burying the bodies, as the injured and vengeful were all Indian people. However, the tribal chief was still unyielding in holding Case accountable. Jamie then stepped in as his brother's lawyer. When he heard that Case's gun was registered under the government's name, he became suspicious and started to hold on to this point. The sheriff became flustered, as swapping guns privately was a serious crime for law enforcement officers. Case, looking as if he was enjoying the show, explained the gun-swapping incident. This made the tribal chief panic, fearing the previous bomb incident would get dragged out. He quickly found an excuse to send the two brothers away. As they were leaving, Jamie subtly threatened the sheriff and retrieved Case's gun. He was also worried that the Indian police would continue the investigation and discover the truth about Case killing Robert. Fortunately, everything was resolved smoothly. On the other side, Rip handpicked a murderer named Walker from among those just released from prison. Walker, having nowhere else to go, returned to the ranch with Rip and became a part of the Dutton family. Meanwhile, Beth waited for Dan at the hotel. The old man sitting beside her was a colleague from Salt Lake City who had come explicitly to coax her back to work. Beth, however, expressed that she could manage the company through her computer. As she watched Dan and his wife enter, she struck up a conversation with them, pretending to be interested. The wife, finding Montana too dull, was enchanted by Beth's intriguing nature and struck up a lively conversation. Dan could only force a smile. Upon Case's return to the ranch, Dutton had no plans to let him leave. He used his newly purchased horse to entice Case into taming it for him. Meanwhile, Jamie had invited the dean from Montana State University. The university was in need of a professor in Native American studies, and Monica fit the bill. The dean even told Monica that the starting salary for the professorship was $70,000, and it would increase once she earned her PhD. Monica was thrilled, but also torn. As an Indian teacher, her departure would leave many children without education. Dutton attempted to persuade Monica, but to no avail. She refused the job, unwilling to be used as a pawn by Dutton to control Case. Beth, leaving the hotel after having too much to drink and unable to drive, reluctantly called Jamie. Jamie was irritated by the call, but was forced to do as she asked. The siblings began arguing in the car, even bringing up their deceased mother. In her grief, Beth pulled out a gun to end her life. Jamie, however, didn't believe she would hurt herself and even taunted her. Beth ended up firing the gun, but Jamie swerved the car, causing the shot to miss. Holding the gun, Beth painfully stated that Jamie didn't understand what she had lost. She was the one who had watched their mother die, and she was the one who had killed her. But Jamie had experienced nothing and had no idea about loss. Jamie finally understood Beth's feelings. He decided he wanted Beth to continue hating him if that would help her escape her self-loathing. Perhaps that's the meaning of family, after all. Just as it was getting dark, Case prepared to head home but was stopped by Monica. Their son Tate hadn't slept the previous night because of Case's arrest, and Monica didn't want Tate to face the reality of his cousin leaving, so she decided to spend the night at the ranch. Dutton was delighted and took his grandson back to his room. When Beth returned home to find Dutton telling a bedtime story to his grandson with a gentle look on his face, she was somewhat devastated. She didn't know what her sacrifices were for. It seemed like her father had never loved her. Dutton, hearing the commotion, came out to check and ran into Jamie, who was drinking. Jamie suggested sending Beth back to Salt Lake City, as her shadow was too heavy and staying at the ranch would only worsen her mental state. However, Dutton refused. Although he loved Beth, he needed her to play the villain, to bring down the real estate developer Dan and all their enemies. That night, Monica and Case spoke about Tate. Monica feared that her choices would let Tate down. Case hated that Monica was speaking in the same tone as Dutton. He left her and went to sleep, leaving Monica awake. As she wandered outside, she saw a distant flame. It's Rip and the others who were preparing to brand Walker with the family mark. Before dawn, Case took a solitary walk with his horse. The horse got startled and ran off, making Case aware of a grizzly bear on the other side of the river. The bear was about to cross the river and attack. Case spread his arms wide in an attempt to scare the bear away, but it had no effect. He was ready to face death when Rip, who had come from behind, fired a shot into the sky, scaring the bear to wet its pants and flee away. Even though Rip saved Case, the two had been at odds since they were kids. Without saying a word, they started to wrestle their muscles. Case looked down on the dirty work Rip did and mocked him as Dutton's dog. Rip was tired of Case's troublemaking and having to clean up after him. He wished Case would go back to the Indian reservation and never return. Afterwards, he threw Robert's autopsy report on the ground and left. Monica also got up early that day. She needed to take Tate to school. Dutton came to thank her for staying overnight. Monica took this opportunity to inquire about the brand. Dutton said that only those who have made mistakes carry the Dutton brand. The brand signifies trust, forgiveness, and a second chance. Monica then asked about the brand on Case. She didn't understand what he had done wrong and why he hated his father so much that he didn't even want to return to the ranch. At this time, Tate came running over. Dutton quickly sent his grandson away. He didn't want such a young child to hear about these issues. When Case and Monica first fell in love, Monica got pregnant before they were married. Dutton didn't want his son to marry an Indian. However, Case defied his order and still married Monica. Dutton had no choice but to brand Case himself as a punishment. After hearing the truth, Monica felt a bit guilty, but she was still grateful for Dutton's honesty. When Dutton entered the house, Tate was struggling to decide which donut to take. Looking at his innocent grandson, Dutton suddenly felt it was time for a change. What he lost in his son, he could perhaps find in his grandson. Meanwhile, the tribal chief was also up to no good. He wanted to buy the land adjacent to the Dutton ranch. After searching for a while, he set his sights on the residential land that Dan was preparing to build on. An assistant told him that the land would be taken back by the bank in a year because it didn't even have electricity. The rocks blasted by Dutton had changed the course of the river, causing Dan to lose the conditions for building a hydropower station. However, the tribal chief was convinced that reclaiming ancestral property had to start with this piece of land. Jamie took Beth to meet the governor, his tardiness making him seem a bit anxious. However, Beth insisted on making a grand entrance and even went to the bathroom, leaving Jamie helpless. The governor arranged the upcoming election. The old attorney general was going to retire, and Jamie was coming to run for his position. The governor also assigned the beautiful assistant to assist Jamie. The assistant had previously served as Obama's campaign manager and was undoubtedly experienced. Beth watched as Jamie and the assistant exchanged glances. Knowing these two had taken a liking to each other, she began to mock them, even saying she wanted a handsome assistant when she ran for office. The governor kept her behind for a private conversation. In the governor's eyes, Beth was just an immature child. Since her mother's death, she had been drinking heavily, refusing to face reality and wanting to fight with the world. The governor also said that Beth couldn't fight with her because she was stronger. Moreover, she refused to endorse Beth until Beth faced reality. Beth openly admitted that she didn't come to ask the governor for an endorsement. She was there to warn the governor to stay away from her mother's bed, or she would ruin the governor's career. After all, she was used to playing the villain. After Beth stormed out, the governor also called Jamie in separately. She had heard rumors of Dutton's cancer and wanted Jamie to confirm. Jamie heard this and panicked, rushing home. After Jamie left, the governor fell into deep thought. She suddenly lost trust in Dutton because his rebellious daughter Beth was definitely not fit for a politician. Perhaps it was time to support someone else. On the way to school, Tate did everything he could to slander the Indian school, wanting to stay at his grandfather's house. He even swore a lot, claiming he learned all this at school. However, Monica saw through him instantly. When the mother and son arrived at school, they encountered a student fight. Monica ran to stop it, but was accidentally punched. When Case received the call, he rushed to the school with Dutton. The school doctor only did simple bandaging for Monica before letting Case take her home. Just as he was checking Monica's consciousness, a drone entered the reservation. Case knew it was white treasure hunters looking for treasure, so he and his family teamed up to shoot down the drone. They then found the treasure hunter's car not far away. He rushed to chase them, but still let them escape. Back home after a day of troubles, Case saw Monica had fainted on the ground again. Dutton returned home later and was met by a worried Jamie and Beth. However, he insisted on denying his cancer. He then called Beth into the room saying he had heard of Beth's non-cooperation from the governor. He hoped Beth could toughen up like a man and help manage the family affairs. He even threatened his daughter that if she didn't behave, he would send her back to Salt Lake City and not allow her to mention her mother, because in his heart, Beth had lost this right. At this time, the developer Dan was discussing with his counselor on how to sue Dutton. Dutton had blown up the mountain, destroying the habitat of the protected trout. The counselor suggested exploiting this point. However, the tribal chief, who was eavesdropping, came over and said there was no need. He would fund the construction of a hydroelectric station. The only condition was for Dan to sell him this piece of land to open a casino. In return, Dan could also get 15% of the casino's revenue. Upon hearing this, Dan couldn't wait to sign the contract, but the counselor quickly stopped him. There's no such thing as a free lunch. She wanted to investigate the tribal chief first. However, Dan refused. The enemy of his enemy is his friend. An agreement was finally reached. The scene then shifts to Dutton making his usual rounds of the ranch when he came across a group of foreign tourists taking photos of a brown bear. Fearing the bear would be provoked and bite someone, he rushed over with his shotgun and signaled the tourists to back off. However, the tourists were calm, not believing the bear would harm anyone. So Dutton pointed at the sign saying this land was all his and they were trespassing. One of the tourists was not pleased. In his view, the land belongs to the state. It's impossible for an individual to own such a large piece of land. He even suggested that Dutton should distribute the land to others. Angry, Dutton fired 2 shots into the air, causing the tourists to quickly run towards the bus. Dutton chased them, telling the older gentleman that in America, they never share land. After Case took Monica to the hospital, doctors performed a craniotomy to clear the hematoma. The operation was successful, but Monica was too weak. This made Case ache with sympathy. At this time, Tate was clamoring to see his mother and even hit a nurse. In desperation, the nurse called security to educate the unruly Tate. This scene was just seen by Case, who punched the security guard in anger. When the doctor arrived and understood the situation, he ordered Case to leave the hospital with Tate, warning Case that no matter how ignorant a child is, they should not resort to violence. Meanwhile, Dutton was giving a speech at a dinner. He had invited many close-knit voters, trying to drum up support for Jamie and Beth. However, Beth was absent without reason, and Jamie was busy setting up his campaign office. The governor was present, but she didn't even glance at Dutton. Dutton sensed a change in the wind, but couldn't figure out why. Beth was lying in bed, crying. Her father wanted her to be like a man, but he forgot that she was just a girl. And all of this was due to the influence of family lineage. But as she saw menstrual blood when she was young, all she knew was to cry. Her strong mother, upon learning this, asked her not to be brought down by these female characteristics, even hoping she could be stronger and more powerful than men. Beth cried all night while recalling all of these, and as soon as it was dawn, she returned to her fearless self. Since both her father and mother wanted her to be like a man, she decided to start with horse riding. But every time she shakily climbed onto the horse, she was thrown off. Walker came over to help Beth. He even put his hand on Beth's waist, asking her to sense her emotions. At first, Beth thought he was trying to take advantage of her, but then she noticed Walker's nervousness. Walker told Beth that horses, like people, can sense the rider's emotions. The more afraid the rider is, the less secure the horse will feel. Beth, following Walker's instructions, got on the horse again. This time, she didn't even use the reins and easily rode around the field. Seeing from a distance, Dutton and Rip felt relieved. This was probably the best thing that had happened in these troubling days. Afterwards, Dutton ordered Rip to drive the bear away, fearing that his cattle would be ruined. Meanwhile, the tribal chief's casino plan had hit a snag due to Dan's sudden increase in the land sale price. Unable to negotiate, the tribal chief could only persuade Dan to reconsider and then left. Little did he know, Dan had already planned it all out. Owning the casino was clearly more reliable than receiving 15% of the revenue. The counselor also told Dan that she had started a lawsuit against Dutton for changing the river course and destroying the trout habitat. Meanwhile, back at home preparing his election materials, Jamie received a subpoena for Dutton. At this time, Dutton was at the hospital for a checkup. Upon leaving, he ran into Tate and only then learned about Monica's accident. To lessen Case's burden, he decided to take Tate back to the ranch. But just as they arrived home, he felt a pain in his stomach, so severe that it sapped him of all strength. Dutton had to hand Tate over to Beth and return to his bedroom. Beth was quite worried about her father, but she dared not defy his orders. She could only take a hungry Tate to the cowboy's shed for some food. Once back in his bedroom, Dutton started vomiting blood. Seeing the fresh blood in the toilet, he could only helplessly pray to God. There was too little time and too much he hadn't done yet. He really didn't want to die in this way. Rip, along with Jimmy and Walker, went to find the bear, but Jimmy forgot to bring a gun. The three of them were stunned at the sight of the brown bear. Jimmy fell off his horse as they tried to escape and was cornered by the bear into a tree. Only with the help of Rip and Walker did he manage to escape with his life. Afterwards, Rip went alone with a gun to find the brown bear. At the edge of a cliff, he stumbled upon a couple who had sought refuge from the bear below the cliff. But after the bear left, they were too scared to climb back up. Seeing that the boy didn't understand English, Rip told the girl to inform her companion that he would pull her up first since both of them were too heavy for him. However, the boy clung to the rope, and in the ensuing struggle, the girl lost her grip and fell off the cliff. Grief-stricken and full of guilt, the boy jumped after her. Before Rip could recover from the shock of the incident, the bear appeared behind him. He quickly drew his gun and shot the bear dead. However, as bears are endangered animals, coupled with the incident of the 2 deaths, Rip found himself in big trouble. When he tried to seek legal assistance, he found that he couldn't reach lawyer Jamie no matter how many times he tried. Back at the cowboy's shed, it was lively, but the liveliness only made Rip feel more alone. When Rip was a child, he had a hard life. After his parents divorced, his father murdered his entire family. Luckily, Rip was just knocked unconscious. When he woke up, he killed his father and hid at Dutton's ranch for a few days. Dutton looked at this young and fierce boy and guessed his identity. However, Rip had no regrets about what he had done. His only regret was not killing his father sooner. Upon hearing this, Dutton decided to keep Rip. He fed him and asked if he could ride a horse. Although Rip wasn't very skilled, he promised to learn. His past life had already accustomed him to pain. As far as he was concerned, riding a horse was nothing. Even a scalding iron on his chest wouldn't matter. Later, Rip headed to the scene of the incident along with Dutton and the police. However, Officer Donnie was preoccupied with the dead bear, endlessly talking about it. After all, in these times, human deaths were common, but dead bears were rare. Once the vegetarians and environmentalists found out, they would likely petition the White House. Donnie even suspected Rip of killing the brown bear and then causing the death of the 2 tourists who had witnessed it. Rip was speechless. At the time, he had been close to the bear, and it was a pure self-defensive reaction. If the shooting distance didn't prove that, he had no other way to explain. He had tried to do a good deed, but ended up with a villain's reputation. Dutton called Jamie and asked him to come quickly and help. However, Jamie was busy at the moment. The assistant was worried that the issue with the Dutton ranch would involve Jamie and hung up all the calls from the Dutton family. This scene was witnessed by a journalist who had been undercover in Jamie's campaign office, investigating the Dutton family affairs. She was highly suspicious that there was a cover-up in the cattle incident. She wanted to ask for more details but got scolded. Monica, whose memory had become foggy after her injury, suddenly felt that Case was not like when they first met. She decided to take Tate back to the Indian reservation and live with her grandfather. At this point, Case was preparing to go home to change clothes. However, he found that his house had been ransacked by thieves, and Tate discovered that all the dinosaur fossils had also been stolen. Case returned to the hospital and wanted to tell Monica about these things, but Monica told him that she wanted to leave because she was fed up with Case's continuous troublemaking and the Dutton family. For the sake of their son, she decided to distance herself from them. A distraught Case left the hospital, but at the gas station, he encountered a reckless robber. In a fit of anger, Case beat him half to death. Since Rip's case was related to wildlife, he went to the scene again. The female officer, who knew Rip was not a good person, was always on guard. Before leaving, she locked Rip's gun in her car. The mountain road was difficult to navigate, and the 2 could only travel by horse. Rip noticed a horsefly on the rump of the officer's horse and kindly warned her, only to be rejected. The next second, the horse startled and ran off with her. By the time Rip caught up, she had been thrown onto a steel rod. With Rip's help, the officer managed to cling on to life for the time being. The tribal chief once again found Dan and revealed his plan. He intended to use a casino to stimulate the economy and rebuild the town. As a result, the surrounding land would appreciate in value, and the Dutton family would be ruined due to the extra high tax they had to pay. And by then, Dan and the tribal chief would divide the spoils. Under great temptation, Dan finally agreed to sell the land to him. On the other hand, Beth had already checked Dan's assets and found that he had mortgaged all his properties to do business in Montana. She ran to provoke Dan, preparing to manipulate and buy all his stock at a low price. After working for 2 days, Jamie returned home, only to be greeted by a furious Dutton. He had already received the subpoena that Jamie had forgotten. He wanted Jamie to accompany Rip to the scene the next day, but Jamie refused, saying he had campaign activities. Angered, Dutton asked him to withdraw from the election, stating that he would let the incumbent attorney general continue in office. A dispute arose between the father and son. Jamie felt his father was ignoring his efforts, and in a fit of temper, he attacked him, only to be knocked down by Dutton. Rip quickly stepped in to stop them, but Jamie was still kicked out of the ranch. Dutton sternly said before he put family first, he should never come back. After his son left, Dutton felt a wave of weakness. The Dutton Ranch had been running for 132 years, but now it seemed it would fail under his watch. He didn't want to give up and was striving, but he didn't know who this effort was for. Jamie rushed to tell his assistant about the Attorney General matter. Surprisingly, after listening, she tempted him to seize this opportunity to break away from the Dutton family and pursue what he truly wanted to do. At this time, Walker was also worried. He feared that the Dutton family would force him into crime again, and so he contemplated leaving. However, when he told Rip about it, it piqued Rip's suspicion. Rip even said that Walker had lost his chance to leave the ranch. As night fell, the dead bear at the cliff was discovered by a pack of hungry wolves. This abundant dinner might bring a bit of good luck to the Dutton family. When the sheriff returned to the scene the next day, the bear had been gnawed to just a skeleton. He asked Donnie if there were any bullets on the scene. Donnie said there weren't, which aroused Dutton's suspicion. He went to the tree where Rip had been and fired 2 shots. The casings landed neatly on the ground, so he suspected that Donnie had hidden the casings. Indeed, he found evidence in Donnie's pocket. Now, Donnie could no longer hide the truth and told the sheriff the location of the casings. The spot was very close to Rip's hideout, indicating that Rip had fired the gun because his life was threatened. Rip was finally vindicated. Dutton rushed to question Donnie about why he had done such a thing and revealed his scheme of having a club membership. A substantial sum of money is needed for a club membership, and the salary from the police station was clearly not enough for Donnie to squander. Dutton firmly believed that Donnie had taken someone else's money. The discovery disheartened Dutton as the number of people opposing him was increasing, almost encompassing the entire county. However, he always felt that these were smokescreens with the real conspiracy lying behind them. Jamie didn't return overnight. Dutton realized that Jamie had chosen his own path, so he went to find the governor and the attorney general, asking them to help kick Jamie out of the election, but he was declined. The governor even tactfully asked Dutton to resign from his position as the chairman of the livestock committee. She had also heard that Dutton was being sued for changing the course of a river. Dutton left when he realized that the negotiation was going nowhere, only to see Jamie chatting and laughing in the room. He stormed in to confront his son, but the security guards followed him. Dutton could only give a verbal warning before leaving. Meanwhile, while lassoing a cow, the worker Jimmy was pulled off his horse. He clung to the lasso, getting dragged and rolled around by the cow until the cowboys rushed to rescue him. Even Walker had to admit that he had never seen a bigger fool than Jimmy in his 7 years in prison. When Rip walked into the stable, Dutton was shoveling horse dung. He would do this when he couldn't clear his thoughts. He then asked Rip to start investigating his opponents, starting with the real estate developer Dan. He had given up on seeing the doctor, and with his life ticking away, it was time to take direct action. Meanwhile, Beth was in the house, searching and finding out that Dan's stocks had astonishingly risen to $9 overnight. She could only postpone her acquisition plan to deal with Dan. At this point, Dutton walked in, asking Beth to put the ranch into a trust and act as the executor. Beth realized that her father was making a will, and Jamie was not in the list of beneficiaries. Listening to the tone her father emphasized, a hint of amusement appeared in Beth's moist eyes. That day, she arrogantly went to find Jamie, collecting his credit card and keys. After handing everything over and watching Beth leave, Jamie felt an unprecedented sense of freedom. When the journalist saw that Jamie had quarreled with his family, she revealed her identity as a journalist. She also said that according to her investigation, she had written an article about Dutton's wrongdoings. Simultaneously, she hoped that Jamie could participate. After listening, the assistant quickly pulled Jamie aside for a private chat. She needed to know what wrongs Dutton had committed and how much Jamie was involved in these misdeeds. But before the two could reach a conclusion, the journalist followed them. She said she would write an article about Jamie's struggle against his corrupt father, portraying him as a new type of politician. At this point, Jamie had no choice. Rip had found a dancer girl named Avery to secretly film Dan for him. He also promised that after the task was accomplished, he would take her back to the ranch to continue being a cowboy. Indeed, Avery managed to capture Dan discussing casino business with the tribal chief. Only then did Dutton realize that he had fallen into a huge conspiracy. There wasn't much time left, and he had to deal with his opponents completely. After receiving his orders, Rip left. Beth rushed out to inquire about the situation. She needed to know what had happened to better help her father resolve the trouble. However, Rip refused to tell her. Later, as agreed, Rip brought Avery to the cowboy barn. The male cowboys were stunned. They never thought that raising horses would require accepting a cohabitation test. But Avery also warned them fiercely not to provoke her. Case, who had hit someone, was sent home by Donnie. It was only because of his status as a veteran that Donnie let him off the hook. Having lost everything, Case finally admitted defeat. However, Dutton said it was not about winning or losing. He did all these things just to leave something for his son, but Case never really listened to him. Thinking of his own son, Case finally agreed to move back home with Dutton. While Dutton was thinking about how to make room for Case, Case carried his worn-out bag and headed towards the cowboy barn. Now, all he had left was his horse training skills. As soon as he entered, his good-looking muscles quickly attracted Avery's attention. At this time, Monica went home with her grandfather. However, Tate was very reluctant to live this way. He missed his father and the ranch, crying ceaselessly while leaning on the fence. Monica could only watch her son's crying figure and called for her father to move her back into the house. But the old man was hard of hearing and couldn't hear her. A sense of powerlessness swept over Monica, and she felt that everything she had done was wrong. Meanwhile, Case was executing Rip's orders, secretly abducting Dan with the cowboys. They hung him from a tree, and Dan was left screaming for help, but to no avail. Under Rip's coercion, he had to confess all his secrets with the tribal chief. Rip's goal was to let Case hear firsthand about the plot. Afterward, they lowered Dan from the tree. Upon hearing everything, Case became furious. He slapped the horse from under Dan, leaving him to hang from the rope. Rip watched Case in shock. At that moment, he felt that perhaps this man was even more ferocious than himself. Beth sensed that her father's condition was not optimistic. As she looked at the empty dining table, her meal became sadder. Dutton comforted her, saying that what mattered was the table itself. As long as people have a place to eat, it's enough. Beth understood that her father was using the table as a metaphor for the ranch. She said that everything she did was for her father. As soon as he was gone, she would dare to sell the table immediately. After hearing this, Dutton sighed heavily. The cowboy life was indeed difficult and long. With that, the first season of this drama comes to an end. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.